Welcome to Saturdays at 7, Christian Scholars Review's conversation series with thought leaders about the academic vocation and the relationship that vocation shares with the church. My name is Todd Ream. I have the privilege of serving as the publisher for Christian Scholars Review and as the host for Saturdays at 7. I also have the privilege of serving on the faculty and the administration at Indiana Wesleyan University. Our guest is Dominic Preziosi, editor of Commonweal. Thank you for joining us.
It's very good to be here. Thanks, Todd.
In his widely cited Models of the Church, published in 1974 by Doubleday, Cardinal Avery Dulles identifies the church as an institution, a mystical communion, a sacrament, a herald, and a servant. Eventually, he would go on to add a community of disciples to that list of models. When writing about an entity as large, diverse, and long in history as the church, in what ways, if at all, can Dulles' thinking be beneficial to you and your fellow journalists at Commonweal?
So I think, I'll just start by saying that this is a very challenging question. And I would say that the last one you mentioned there would probably be the most appealing to us, a community of disciples. But I think, all of them probably have something for us as journalists to keep in mind. And I think it's important, maybe particularly for a magazine like Commonweal, that we have an understanding of the magisterium and the documents that come down through the church and the thinking behind the church, including some of the systematic theology. I think one of the things that we also like to consider, though, is thinking too much, too systematically at the expense of lived experience might sort of be a hindrance to what we do as journalists, particularly at a magazine like ours.
When interacting with the church as exemplified by such a model, what would you and your colleagues identify, if any, are that model's theological strengths that it allows you to see maybe deeper or further into the life of the church? And then, if there are any, what would be the attendant weaknesses that may come?
Sure. I think, although we do not exist necessarily to sort of, plumb the depths of the church as an institution, nevertheless, we work, we work in a business where we view the church's operations as an institution. And we look at the church's role in history as an institution as well. So I think that this is something that we would want to be very mindful of also. But, we host in our pages a number of spiritual writers and theologians of all stripes who would, I think, probably be able to take on, these the elements of this model in a very specific way, whether mystical communion, sacrament, herald, or servant. So I think, it's useful to have a model like this to have at our disposal and to contemplate. But I'm not necessarily sure it's something that we specifically and explicitly view or use as some kind of a tool or instrument in the day-to-day.
As complicated as the church is then, is there a way then that journalists can be mindful that the church may be operating out of different sensibilities, whether represented by these models or others, different sensibilities, and doing so simultaneously?
Yeah, well, sure. I think, the word is complicated, and I think that that's something that anybody who sort of covers the Catholic Church knows. I mean, it's a universal church, and it's a church that's been around for, 2,000 years, and, it's gone through some complicated periods in its own history, and we may, even up into the current moment, there's a lot of complexities and a lot of cross currents and a lot of realities of the church that I think we just sort of have to contend with. I think the good thing, being sort of the journalistic side of this, is we approach that in a kind of objective, exploratory way, sort of acknowledging the complexities of the church, and I think also sort of acknowledging that none of these can sort of be reduced to sort of simplistic pronouncements or opinions or articles that somehow reduce it to something that it's not.
Thank you. I want to ask you a little bit about your own vocation as a journalist.
Sure.
Now. You earned your undergraduate degree at Fordham University, then dropped down to Manhattan there and did your graduate work at the CUNY Graduate Center. At what point, though, did you discern journalism would play an important role of how you understood your vocation?
Sure. Well, I should go back even farther to prior to my time at Fordham. I grew up in a household where newspapers were part of our daily experience. My mom spent some time working at the New York Times, and before that as as a young adult was a columnist for her local paper growing up, and she worked at a paper called the Hartford Courant for a short time as well. But my dad was a big reader of newspapers as well, so I grew up in New Jersey, but really at any given time we would have the New York Times in our home, two weekly county papers in Hunterdon County, the Newark Star Ledger, uh, uh, and a number of magazines as well. So I grew up around this kind of stuff, and in high school I was an editor of the high school paper. Uh, I was a subscriber to a number of periodicals in high school and college, and I worked on the papers at Fordham University as well. So it's always sort of been in my I guess DNA. I don't know if that's the the right way to put it, but I was certainly always drawn to it.
Yeah. Personally, I'm not sure what I miss the most, the feel of
Hmm.
the newspaper
Yeah,
or the smell of the newspaper when I
yeah,
first unroll it.
sure. Well, my wife and I talk about this a lot because there is something certainly about the tactile experience of holding the newspaper, and if I recall the Sunday papers in particular in the 1970s and 80s growing up, which were quite heavy because of all the sections, and you would spend the entire day paging through these papers, and sometimes it would take more than a day, to get through them.
Are there any mentors then along the way, whether through your college years or, while working on the student paper or even in your high school years when working on the student paper or
Yeah.
early in your professional years?
Oh, yeah, yeah, sure, sure. Well, I think I've been lucky in that a number of people have maybe, unbeknownst to them, served as mentors. But interestingly, in college, it was actually an instructor I had in my fiction writing workshop. So I think really was really very generous to me and very supportive of the work I was doing. And her name was Elizabeth Cullinan, whom some of in the audience might recognize as a short story writer and novelist. And she spent quite a lot of time writing and working for the New Yorker. Um, and that was really a formative time for me. It was junior, senior year of college, and the work that we did in her workshop and the feedback that she gave to all her students was really, really valuable. And I maintained contact with her after graduating as well. And she sort of helped guide me. Just a gap in my CV here. Yes, Fordham University and then the Graduate Center, but in between, I got an MFA in fiction at Brooklyn College too. So I spent a lot of time thinking I'd be, a novelist or short story writer at some point. But this continued, into my professional life. I've been in New York publishing my entire career, but I've had good editors all along the way. But probably one of my a real mentor was a guy I worked with at a business technology magazine that was published by McGraw-Hill in the mid '90s, and he was a poet himself, a successful poet himself. But he was the managing editor of this magazine, and also on the staff were a number of former daily newspaper types. Uh, but he just had this approach to the written word, even if it was something as complicated or as esoteric or as specialized as security technology, networking security technology, who said, listen, if you like working with words and you want to make something better that somebody has turned in about this stuff, here's how to do it. And he really was quite an amazing editor, and he imparted quite a lot of knowledge and wisdom to me. And I
Yeah.
still think about him quite a lot.
Yeah. That's wonderful. As a writer, but then also as an editor,
Mhm.
you also, from some distance, probably have your favorites. We all seem to do so. May I ask who are authors and or editors from afar who
Sure.
inspired you along the way and contributed to how you think about your own vocation?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, Todd, because I actually wrote down a list in preparation. I think I've generally been partial to magazine writers over my life. But beginning at a young age, I in high school I was a very big baseball fan, and but there was a writer for the New Yorker named Roger Angel, who might be familiar to you, who wrote about baseball for the New Yorker, and he wrote a number of books over the decades about baseball. And I just thought he was the best thing going. I mean, because he not only knew baseball and loved baseball and clearly enjoyed being a spectator and talking to the players and understood the nuances of the game and the history of the game. But gosh, what a writer! What a writer. He was just incredible. And I was always very excited when a piece by him appeared in the New Yorker. And then, of course, I would try to buy books if I had a few extra bucks in my pocket once they got to the bookstore, the compilations. But I read a lot of criticism and cultural criticism. I was a big fan of the movie critic Pauline Kael, but I liked the writing of John McPhee, who was just sort of a generalist, who covered everything from Bill Bradley to the New Jersey pine barrens to the wilds of Alaska. But I I remember reading as a young person, probably as a teenager. Speaking of having the New York Times around, uh, there was a columnist for the Times who was actually a conservative political columnist named William Safire, who'd been a speechwriter, I believe, in the Nixon administration, if I'm not mistaken. But his political columns, I was probably a little too young to sort of sort of process in any sort of meaningful way, even though I read them. But he had a column in the magazine called On Language that appeared maybe once or twice a month,
Yeah.
which I couldn't wait to read because he just wrote on language literally. I mean, I guess maybe that's how I ended up becoming a copy editor, my first job out of college, because I was just sort of really interested in the way he talked about words and about sentences. But I think there's so many people I still like to read today, sort of across the board, and the list would be far too long to go into. But there's a lot of good people out there, and I really do appreciate all the work they're doing.
Yeah. Thank you very much. As you mentioned, you worked in journalism and media in the New York area for your whole life, whether it's living in New Jersey, but now you covered most of the boroughs in terms of where you've lived. And you began your career and your tenure with Commonweal in 2012.
That's
But
correct.
could you describe a little bit more about your professional journey and how you followed it up to that point in time which you were appointed for your first position with
Sure,
Commonweal?
sure. So, I think I might have indicated that. Well, my main goal, and it's part of the reason I went to Fordham, and my father had gone to Fordham as well, and actually grew up in the same Bronx neighborhood. But I was always just sort of drawn to New York, so that was a big reason. I wanted to, be in school in New York, and I was lucky enough to do it at Fordham. And I said, just got to stick around and be part of the New York publishing scene. I took a job as a copy editor, entry level job as a copy editor to Trade magazine on the east side of Manhattan, and it was a great time to get a job like that. It was the late '80s, and there was sort of this great sort of golden era of I think one of the golden eras anyway, New York sort of magazine publishing. There were a lot of good publications around, a lot of good work being done sort of across the board. There were magazines like Spy and the New Yorker, New York Magazine. There was a magazine called Wigwag, which was kind of an interesting creature. But you had the alternative press, you had the Village Voice, which was a must read, and this was in addition at the time. New York had 4 daily newspapers. The Times, the Daily News, the Post, and New York Newsday. And so you had this access to this just wonderful sort of store deposit of journalistic expertise and just news being produced and commentary being produced and exciting cultural commentary being produced. So it was not so much that I even necessarily said, I got to get myself to one of these prestigious publications. I'm sort of just living among all these people. I mean, I used to see Jimmy Breslin on the New York Daily News columnist. I used to see him on the street and other sort of columnists of that day. They were part of the city fabric and the city life. And you just, no matter who you were working for, you felt like you were part of it because there were events that brought press people together, and you were just sort of part of this big conversation. And so I thought I wanted to. That was exciting, and I was really liking it. But I did think at some point I'd be a professor of literature, and that's how I ended up, going to grad school at the CUNY Grad Center, and I, did a lot of work there. But ultimately realized that maybe scholarship and the academy weren't really my calling, and by then I'd started a family, so the other considerations sort of come into play, and really what you need is the job, and fortunately I'd done enough experience in journalism that I was able to sort of find my way into sort of management level, managing editing, managing editors at a couple of different places. For a time then, though, this was after the first, so there was that first internet boom right around the turn of the 20th century to the 21st, and then there was the crash right after that. And I'd been working at a publication that covered internet technology, and was going quite well. until it wasn't. Um, and I thought, okay, maybe a little more stable a career path at this moment would be in marketing communications, which I did for about 10 years, and was fine. I think, however, that I realized that this is something that I'm not necessarily drawn to. The work wasn't something that I ultimately found not very appealing, and I remember sort of beginning to think about what the next steps would be, and I actually saw an ad. It was on LinkedIn for the digital editor position at Commonweal, and I sent a letter of application, a resume in quite early in the morning, and by late morning, I had a call from the publisher at the time for an interview, and I was lucky enough that it just sort of fit. And I had been familiar with Commonweal. This I should have mentioned this earlier, but that was another publication. Occasionally in our household, uh, there was a little bit of between my parents, a little bit of a difference in sensibilities. I think my mother was more drawn to what Commonweal was doing. My father was a little concerned that it was maybe a little too liberal, a little too progressive, if not communistic. So, but it was in the house, and of course, I was exposed to it at Fordham University. Commonweal was everywhere. So I just thought, gosh, Commonweal, that would be just a wonderful place to be. And I'm lucky enough that it worked out. I'm very thankful.
Yeah. Can you tell me then about the discernment process that led you to go from digital editor then to being appointed editor in 2019?
Well, I'm not so sure that it was my own discerning. I think I was. I think that fortunately, my predecessor, who I very much enjoyed working with, editor Paul Bauman. I think he encouraged me. He welcomed me to the staff, and I had a very sort of supportive staff, very collegial staff at Commonweal, which has always been the case. I understand through history, of course, although there's sometimes some internal disputes, but I think they're always resolved in a collegial way. But I think it's a really collegial place, and I felt very welcome and very comfortable here. And I think when the opportunity was presented, I thought, well, not only a huge honor, but really something that I kind of almost couldn't believe in some ways was happening to me. This storied publication, which was at the time approaching its 100th anniversary, that I would be fortunate enough to be named editor. I guess, yeah, it did take some thinking. I mean, this was something I remember calling my wife when it was presented to me and saying, is this something to be sure that I want to do? And we talked about it, and I guess I did think about it, and yeah, it seemed like the right choice.
I'm going to ask you about technology here in a
First,
second, and you echoed the technology boom around
mhm,
the turn of the millennium. So
yeah,
I'm going to bracket that out for the side
of
because
course,
we'll ask about that in a second. But over the course of your career, in what ways, if any, has your sense of understanding of the vocation of journalism changed
sure.
apart from technology and the influences that it's had?
Well, the vocation, yeah, I'll try to sort of separate this from the technology, but in some ways it may be difficult. I mean, I think. There was an era where we sort of believe, and we may be idealistic about it, but I think there's some truth to it, where journalism really was a vocational project, and journalism was respected and valued as the fourth estate in this country. And I think there was an understanding that the work that journalists did was to be valued as a good in and of itself, and as a good for society. I think again, there are exceptions, and I'm sure I'm idealizing somewhat, but while there are always there's always been sort of like the chase for scoops, and to get the headlines and all that kind of thing. But I think something has sort of happened in my lifetime, in my career, and I don't know, maybe if it's the sensibility that was brought on by televised news and the 24-hour news cycle on cable that has obviously affected print and now online journalism. I think the pace, of course, is accelerated sort of more than exponentially, I guess. And I think some of there are risks that come with that when things move fast, right? There are always risks, and I think sometimes the pursuit of stories or angles or takes and things like that have not always worked to the benefit of journalism at large.
Thank you. Can you say a little bit more now? You echoed, a couple of things, with technology that's, probably inextricable from the nature of the vocation,
Mhm.
how journalists understand and exercise it,
Mhm.
such as the 24-hour news cycle, cable news, et cetera. Are there other dimensions that you would emphasize or highlight that have been impacted otherwise by technology?
I
Yeah.
think social media is a big something huge to consider, and I think it's something that I'm a pre-internet generation person, but I at least was in the workplace, and I remember one of my early jobs. Uh, I actually was among one of the early users of the internet because I worked for a technology publication. So it felt more or less comfortable with the internet, but I think social media is a little something that I'm still sort of trying to figure out, even though it's now been around for a quarter century or more, right? But I think you know I think social media is something that has brought some benefits, certainly in terms of the dissemination, at least of voices and of pieces and articles and sort of brand recognition and all those things that we thought it would be good for at one time. But I think certainly in the past decade or so, if not more, we've seen I think some of the disadvantages of it, and I think some of the harms that social media bring in terms of just things being sort of unvetted, unverifiable. Certainly, viral is a problem. You know what I mean? Viral used to be a great thing, but I think sometimes something when something goes viral, it's not always great, right? It's sort of hard to cap that. Now, I think on top of that, now of course is the emergence of artificial intelligence and the now artificial intelligence is moving into journalism. I believe I saw something the other day that a major newspaper is will not have its reporters do any writing anymore. The actual writing will be done by an AI
Mm.
bot. The reporters, the bosses sort of justify this by saying, well, the reporters will now have more time to report. They won't have to worry about writing. AI will do the writing. And I think this is a horrible development for any number of reasons. I think, and we've seen it already, I think, on certain, you go to certain corners of the web and even certain, publications that have been around for a while, and you can see that they're doing AI summaries or that they're doing quickly AI generated stories that might not necessarily, uh, that owners or managers of the business believe that it's not necessary for a human to be involved in the actual researching, writing,
Yeah.
and presentation of it. I think that this is something that's going to be quite. We have to be quite aware of what's happening.
Yeah, I would think going back to the earlier question about writers who influenced you and
Mhm.
those you enjoyed reading, part of it is we develop an appreciation for their sensibilities that they bring to bear
Mhm.
in terms of not only the way they present material and how they communicate, but
Mhm.
also the material itself, what they find
Mhm.
important and gravitate toward, because there's always
Mhm.
infinite options there.
Mhm.
And this would seem to, yeah, compromise that in a number of ways. So,
Yeah, yeah, and and also too, there's just sort of the quality control aspect of it. I mean, what's verifiable? What's something that can sort of be just created that's fake.
yeah.
I mean, these are real concerns. I think that not only journalists have to be wary of, but I think this is something that society at large has to be sort of concerned about, or at least certainly paying attention to carefully.
I want to come back now to Commonweal
Sure.
and its relationship with the church. The
Hmm.
church, again, being large, diverse, and long in history,
Hmm.
it's no surprise that there's a wide variety of publications that
Hmm.
intersect with it. Some are
Hmm.
local, some are national,
Hmm.
some are offer devotional insights, others report news and even offer editorial insights. And of course, they run the gamut from, and this is just one of these trajectories or dialectics from the traditional to the progressive. How do you make sense of the ranges of publications that intersect with the church? And then where does Commonweal fit?
Sure. Sure. Well, for one thing, listen. I mean, the fact that there are so many publications across so many across the spectrum of engagement with belief is really well. I mean, it's sort of reflective of the diversity of the church as well. I mean, it's the spaciousness of this whole thing is really kind of incredible, and even if a number of publications or a number of voices or outlets are not to my taste, it's kind of remarkable that they're all out there.
Mhm.
I think Commonweal is fairly unique, but I'm sure every editor will say that about his publication. But Commonweal, I do believe, is fairly unique. I mean, it's completely independent of the church. It was, founded in 1924 by lay Catholics, and has always been run and managed by lay Catholics. And I think its independence from the church has given it sort of that ability to be a little more freewheeling, I guess, a little more constructively critical. Not necessarily needing to necessarily feeling that it has to hew to a specific line or to the specific constraints of a prelate in a certain archdiocese. I think we are there to do sort of what I think is even sort of encouraged in our faith, which is to sort of comment constructively on faults, in a spirit of, I think, sort of fraternal correction, but maybe sometimes even a little bit stronger spirit if we think things are really amiss. I think to Commonweal, sort of what we really have done well and what we I think continue to do well is we talk about the engagement of the church and Catholicism with particular sort of American, pluralistic democracy and American society. And this is where we've been sort of occasionally on the outs over our existence with sort of maybe the prevailing politics, the prevailing sort of societal trends. I think, we were, I think in particular, so think of the Red Scare in the 50s with Senator McCarthy. I think, Senator McCarthy was Catholic, and I think a lot of sort of Catholics felt that because he was sort of exposing communist networks that he was doing, the good of the church, godless communist networks, but Commonweal was opposed to McCarthy and his efforts and what he was about, and that didn't necessarily endear us to some of the hierarchical officials of the church. At the same time, Commonweal for quite a long time had has a sort of concern for pro-life issues that I think ran counter to for a time to some of the prevailing even within Catholicism sort of other attitudes. But I think what we've also done is we understand that nothing can sort of be reduced to sort of single issue politics or even sort of single issue kind of moral theology either. I think at least one of the formative moments in my time in fact, I was a freshman at Fordham at the time, was when Cardinal Joseph Bernardin came and gave his famous address on the seamless garment or consistent ethic of life, which I think is something that is very appealing, and I think that I think Catholics have well, I think certainly Commonweal readers sort of understand the complexity, nuance, and richness of that metaphor. But I think I think we like to see that there is a lot of there's commentary coming from all directions and all points of view and inspirations, but within the context of I think sort of within the context of relationship with Catholicism.
The dimension of it being curated by lay leaders from its very beginning is an important piece of it that I had underappreciated before the way you talked about it. But I think it also happens to explain, how even people who are as close as your parents, their sensibilities, how they could still have divergence sort of takes on what Commonweal represented there.
Sure. Well, I should say that, we do describe ourselves as a journal of opinion, and we like to make opinions. And this is it's across sort of various areas of interest, not just, sort of theological or church related, but, we have quite a history of cultural criticism. So there's a lot of, it's a rather, I think, as I said, unique publication in that sense. I think, the founder said, that they wanted a publication that wanted to bring the Catholic outlook to American life and society and culture and art. And I think that that's really still the best way to think about what we do here.
You mentioned this earlier, but November 12th, 2024 was a large day, an important day in Commonweal's history as it celebrated its 100th anniversary, which I believe, because I double checked and then triple checked my math here, that makes Commonweal approximately 3 months older than Eustace Tilley and his highbrow colleagues with the New Yorker. When celebrating that milestone, you were the editor at the time,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
by almost 5 years at
Yeah.
that point, or by 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
When celebrating that milestone, what aspects of Commonweal's history proved most worthy of celebration
Hmm.
in your estimation and in the estimation of your colleagues?
Well, the fact that we made it to 100, I think, was probably
I don't know.
a,
Fair point.
the Commonweal is sort of famous, if or maybe sort of notorious, I suppose. I don't know for continually being sort of at death's door. I think from a financial standpoint, I think those days have sort of passed, thankfully. But if you go back through some of the archives, we had a lot of fun doing this on staff, where there were these full-throated appeals for people to send whatever they could right now so we could put out the next issue. And I'm glad that we no longer sort of in we're not in those kinds of straits. But I think what we were really, I think, able to celebrate was the fact of so much of such a history and collection of really deep, thoughtful, provocative writing and commentary through 100 years with the Catholic churches in conversation about the Catholic Church in conversation with sort of American society and American democracy. And you could go back. We for the year running up to the actual centennial date, we featured items from each decade of our 100 years in the magazine, and there was never any shortage of material to sort of resurface and give show our readers. In fact, we had to kind of hold things back that we were unable to fit in the print issue, but also to sort of see that the writers that have been in our pages over the years, to see some of the engagement with the issues that were really significant in that moment. Whether it was the Spanish Civil War, whether it was McCarthyism, whether it was the Vietnam War, whether it was civil rights, Vatican II, of course. I mean, Commonweal has covered all of these things in depth, and I think with quite a lot of rigor and heft, not necessarily cheerleading on the cause of the Catholic Church or anything like that. In fact, I think in some ways we were, our editors and writers of the past have tried to hold the church to account on certain things. I think, for instance, that there was some concern in the late '60s when Humanae Vitae was promulgated, over birth control, and I think that came as somewhat of a disappointment to what we were then calling Commonweal Catholics, right? So I think all of this was sort of at play as the centennial approached, and just to be able to sort of celebrate this fact and that we'd been there 100 years. And of course, I'll admit that we were a little happy that we beat the New Yorker by 3 months, which we did not hide. We worked that into our publicity as well. So
perhaps a Netflix documentary then.
Wouldn't that be great? Yeah, would that be great?
In addition to its editorial staff, Commonweal is also served by a host of contributing writers, and several of those individuals have also fortunately been gracious enough to serve as guests for Saturdays at 7, including Massimo Poggioli, Kathleen Keaveney, and John McGreevy. As a result, Commonweal has contributed to the cultivation of vocations of numerous public intellectuals while also benefiting from their efforts. How would you describe the relationship then that Commonweal shares with emerging and established public intellectuals?
Sure. Well, I think what we're looking for from the standpoint of magazine editors is we want to hear the voices of people who are thinking about things and thinking carefully about things, and who don't come necessarily to us with a preset, sort of preformed set of opinions, something that they could just sort of just so kind of take on something, but rather who are working through issues or areas of concern in a meaningful way, in a rigorous way, that also encourages engagement from our readers, welcomes sort of entanglement and tackling issues with the complexity that complex issues deserve. So I think that creates a sort of a really sort of fertile kind of a environment, and I think in doing so, Commonweal not only benefits, and Commonweal's readers not only benefit, but I'd like to think as well that the writers benefit too, because they're constantly thinking. And I think, true thinkers and true intellectuals and good journalists, for that matter, realize that, they might not have thought of everything, in fact. They understand that, oh, maybe I missed this angle, or maybe I'm in fact wrong on this, or maybe there's always time to sort of rethink my opinion based on new input or feedback from others who respond to my work.
Mhm.
So I think that's a really, I think, sort of a great dynamic that's happening with us. And I think, the folks you mentioned, in particular, Massimo and Kathy Caveney, who's just fantastic, and John McGreevy, whose work has appeared with us quite a lot. And, his books, if your listeners or you are familiar with his work, just fantastic stuff. And again, these are just three folks you mentioned, but the way they sort of delve into things and continually sort of revisit and rethink and reimagine accordingly, depending on what they've learned in the interim and how they're engaging with their own interlocutors. I think it's a really a really energetic dynamic. Yeah.
Thank you. In what ways, then, if any, do you believe universities and publications such as Commonweal can partner
Mm,
together in
mm,
cultivating the habits and dispositions
mhm,
that public intellectuals need, whether they are junior faculty that are
mhm,
sort of discerning whether or not their calling is leading them in that direction,
mhm,
or more senior faculty
mhm,
who now have the time
mhm,
and maybe the political capital on their own
mhm.
campuses to contribute in such ways?
Sure, that's a great question. So a lot of our readers and subscribers, and I guess I sort of generally count myself among those. It's remarkable how many say that they were first exposed to Commonweal while in college, and not necessarily even through a theology class, but they might have just gone to the bookstore, or to the back of the church, and there's a copy available, and they pick it up and start leafing through this, and they go, "Oh my gosh, this is something I've always been waiting for." So I think, though, as well, it's something of an acquired taste. So it's not, we're not as big as football is on the Notre Dame campus, for example. But I think we understand the importance of having a magazine like Commonweal in front of college age students. And I think we understand not what they can then sort of how they can engage with what Commonweal does and be exposed to what Commonweal does, and maybe someday, in fact, uh, be part of the that Commonweal conversations that Commonweal holds. As for the faculty who are maybe sort of later career, who have an opportunity, well, gosh, yes, these folks are smart and engaged and connected and are continually thinking about things. And to the extent that we can feature their work and their opinion and commentary, it's really great. But the university setting, of course, is a very I guess as I said, a very fertile one. So the fact that those sort of later in life scholars, or scholars who've already achieved quite a lot, they can impart this to their students as well through Commonweal. So I think there's a definite way. The college campus is an important place, I think, not only for but think about it, really, for any kind of publication or intellectual
Mhm.
endeavor, or anything that cultural endeavor, that where people are still being formed, and they're young, and they're enthusiastic, and they're trying new things out, and they're it's a good place, an important place to be.
Yeah. With its 100-year history, my first exposure to Commonweal was actually going do with a research topic
Hmm.
on a particular figure of prominence in the 50s, 60s, 70s within Catholic higher education in the Catholic Church, and going back and seeing how he and his efforts were covered by Commonweal,
Hmm.
and then comparing that with some other comparable publications that have long histories. And so it serves as a valuable means in terms of
Hmm.
commenting on the age in which we live, but also reflecting back on history
Yeah, of
and
course. Mm.
how seasoned, thoughtful
Yeah,
journalists covered previous
yeah, I think
eras of
that's
time.
yeah. No, I think that's a very interesting way to look at it, for sure. Yeah.
Want to now, as our time unfortunately begins to become short,
Okay.
I ask you, about, sort of again, most broadly about your calling to
Mm,
journalism.
mm,
How do you define it? What practices or rhythms have nurtured it?
mm.
And as you've progressed as a journalist, what maybe forces also threaten it?
Well, these are good questions. I think I've always been sort of interested in what's happening around me, and I do think this goes back to my high school years. And I was very excited back then as a 17-year-old, maybe younger, 16, 17-year-old. to be able to write for the high school newspaper, I was able to cover what many people probably thought was one of the most boring stories ever. But that was the fact that my high school at the time, which was a new public high school, had achieved accreditation in New Jersey. And it was a front page story on it for my high school newspaper that I got to write. And I'm sure none of my classmates read it. But it is something I'm very proud of, and it was recognized by other people.
They appreciated it when they went to apply for
I
college.
think maybe so, maybe so. But I tell you what they did read. I grew up in an area where hunting was very popular, and I wrote a signed editorial in opposition to hunting. Look, I was ill formed at the time, and I had opinions, but I didn't necessarily realize that other people would also have opinions that held merit. So that was kind of a kind of a a cautionary tale and a helpful experience. I think, but paying attention, I think, is something that I've always just sort of felt the need to do, the instinct, I suppose. And and there is an aspect I think that writers and theologians have said, and others, that paying attention is a form of love, I guess. And I think that that's if I think about it, is that's how I sort of approach some of these things. I've, as I mentioned, have been in New York City since the early '80s, and I think being around people in this very sort of incarnated way, in these encounters on the street, and encounters in the subway, encounters in crowded elevators or restaurants or schools, whatever, I think you really are forced to see the different circumstances that people are in or that people come from, and especially when you begin to talk to them as well, and then you sort of also begin to understand some of the commonalities too. So I think this has sort of informed me, particularly. I mean, I guess maybe always, although maybe not consciously, and maybe I think I'm a little more aware of it and appreciative of it now, especially since being at Commonweal.
Thank you. Are there any particular intellectual or moral virtues you believe journalists need to cultivate in order to flourish? And or perhaps theological virtues that they need to pray to receive in relation to
Sure.
advancing their calling?
Sure. Well, I think all the virtues are necessary for journalists, but I think I think in terms of theological virtue, I do think charity is extremely important, and I sort of indicated that a moment ago. Whether you
Yeah.
think about it as love or charity, and I think these are very important virtues for journalists, because we can't imagine, or we can't be expected, or we can't assume to understand where the other person is coming from until we hear from that other person. But I think, intellectual moral virtues, these are just, I mean, look, I think most editors will tell their reporters this: temperance, fortitude, prudence. I mean, be careful out there. Double check, make sure you're fact checking. Maybe make sure you ask the next question. Don't assume you have all the answers. Make sure to go back and cover another detail. Or if you're confused about something, check it out. Those are all very important virtues, I think, for journalists.
Great. Flip side of that, then, what vices would
Yeah.
you advise journalists to be prepared to confront?
Well, pride, obviously. I guess a deadly sin of vice, whatever. I think, but self-certainty is something that I think journalists really need to be careful about. And I think if you see somebody who professes to be a journalist, or even opinion writer, or an essayist or columnist who exhibits so much self-certainty, I think you have to wonder, well, are they still really living up to the vocation that they say that they profess to be a part of? So,
Yeah. Thank you. For our final question then today, I want to ask you, moving forward and in the age in which we live and find ourselves, in what ways do you believe journalists could be of greater service to the church, and perhaps the church could be of greater service to journalists?
well, I think, as I've indicated, something that Commonweal has always done is sort of pointed out gently, but occasionally forcefully too, or where the church might be misstepping, or where its representatives here on earth might be misstepping. And that's not to say necessarily that we're condemning, but more in a spirit of that correction, and to say that people of good faith can sort of also disagree, and I think journalists are sort of obligated to note that when that happens. As for the church and journalists, something that I think is sort of I've always sort of appreciated, that one of the final documents that came out of Vatican II was about the media. and about the need for the church to support the media and to understand the role of the media in a free society. And I do wish that the church, I think we hear about it occasionally, and I'm wondering what the papacy of Leo might bring, and I wonder how the church institutionally in the United States might begin to sort of remember that this is something that that came out of Vatican II, as I think as journalism is facing threats here in the United States, that it's the church should be supportive, as it claimed to be, at the end of Vatican II, of what the press is about. I think the church could also sort of, on that point, there's a portion of that document that says, governments cannot spread disinformation. They can't lie, and governments cannot shut down the free press. So, I think to hear more of that, I think a little more explicitly or volubly would be nice at this moment. To know that it's there and that we can draw on those documents and that thinking is very helpful for us at the moment. So,
thank you very much. Our guest has been Dominic Preziosi, editor of Commonweal. Thank you for taking time to share your insights and wisdom with us.
Well, thanks for this conversation, Todd. It was good to be here.
Thank you for joining us for Saturdays at 7. Christian Scholars Review's conversation series with thought leaders about the academic vocation and the relationship that vocation shares with the church. We invite you to join us again next week for Saturdays at 7.